In April 1204, an army of Christian knights breached the walls of Constantinople. Not Muslim walls, not enemy walls. The walls of the greatest Christian city on earth, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the closest thing the medieval world had to a permanent centre of civilization. The Theodosian walls had stood for 800 years. No army had ever taken them by direct assault. Persians failed, Avars failed, Arabs failed twice, Bulgars failed. The walls held against everything the world could throw at them for 8 centuries, and they fell to an ally. The Fourth Crusade was called by Pope Innocent III to retake Jerusalem. It never got there. The Venetians, who had built the ships and financed the campaign, were owed money the Crusaders could not pay. Constantinople was rich, weakened by a succession dispute, and Venice had every commercial reason to want the Byzantine trade monopoly broken. So the fleet turned, not toward the enemy, toward the ally. 3 days of pillage followed. Churches stripped of their gold, libraries burned. The bronze horses looted from the hippodrome still stand today above the entrance of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. 4 stolen horses taken from a city Venice was sworn to protect that have never gone home. Byzantium never recovered. It fractured into rival successor states, clawed back Constantinople decades later, and limped on for another 2.5 centuries in a diminished, hollowed-out form until the Ottomans delivered the final blow in 1453. But the historians who study this properly agree on the actual verdict. The empire's fatal wound was inflicted in 1204, not 1453, by an ally, not an enemy. That is what a broken loyalty actually does. It does not just cost you in the moment, it costs you the capacity to ever fully recover, because the thing that made the wound possible was not weakness in the walls, it was trust in the wrong people. I want to talk today about loyalty because I think it is the single most degraded concept in the modern West, and almost nobody is naming it directly. Not loyalty to a flag in some abstract sentimental sense, loyalty as the actual load-bearing structure underneath every relationship a person has to their state, to their employer, to their friends, to the person they love, and to the country that is supposed to be built around people like them. Every one of those bonds is failing simultaneously across Britain, America, and Canada, and I do not think that is a coincidence. I think it is the same underlying mechanism, repeating itself at every scale. Start with the state, because this is where the pattern is clearest and best documented. For the first time in the 26-year history of the Edelman Trust Barometer, trust in employers fell, down to around 75%. That may sound like a small drop, but understand what it means. Employer trust has been the single most stable, most reliably high number in that entire survey for a quarter of a century. It just broke. In the same year, trust in national governments fell 16 percentage points. Trust in major news organizations fell 11 points. The institutions that ask the most of citizens, that demand taxes, compliance, and in extreme cases, their lives, are the institutions people trust the least right now, and the decline is recent, sharp, and accelerating. Average job tenure in the United States fell from 4.2 years in 2012 to 3.7 years by 2022. More than 60% of workers globally now say they no longer expect long-term career growth from a single employer. Over 260,000 people were laid off across the tech industry alone in 2023. Another 150,000 in 2024, frequently at companies posting record profits in the same quarter. Simon Sinek said it more plainly than any economist has managed. They've grown up now in a world that demands loyalty, but offers none. Cashing in early is the correct response to the world we live in. There is a man in Brazil, Walter Orthman, who holds the Guinness World Record for the longest career at a single company. 84 years, same firm. He is a relic from a world that has completely disappeared, standing next to a generation whose average job tenure is under 4 years. And the honest question worth asking is which one of them is actually behaving irrationally. Orthman's loyalty made sense in a world where the company offered something durable in return, a pension, a career ladder, a reasonable expectation that hard work would be rewarded with security. Remove that side of the exchange and the loyalty stops making sense. It does not disappear because people became worse. It disappears because the transaction it was built on stopped being honoured by the other party first. Aristotle worked this out over 2,000 years ago, and almost nobody quotes him properly on it. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he identifies 3 kinds of friendship. Friendship of utility, where two people are bonded by what they get from each other, friendship of pleasure, bonded by enjoyment of each other's company, and friendship of virtue, where two people are bonded by a genuine mutual respect for who the other person actually is. Only the third kind, he argues, is stable and lasting because it does not depend on circumstances remaining favourable. The other two dissolve the instant the utility or the pleasure stops flowing. The modern relationship between citizen and state, employee and employer, has become almost entirely a friendship of utility, in Aristotle's terms, dressed up in the language of loyalty and belonging that used to describe something deeper. Companies still print words like family and culture and values on the office wall while conducting mass layoffs by spreadsheet. Governments still invoke shared sacrifice and national unity while demonstrably prioritizing other interests over the people making the sacrifice. The language of virtue friendship has been kept. The substance underneath it has been quietly replaced with utility. And utility-based bonds, Aristotle told us, break the moment the utility runs out. That is exactly what is happening at scale across the entire Western world right now. Now, friendship itself, because the collapse is not just institutional, it has gone all the way down to the most basic human bonds a person can have. The share of Americans reporting no close friends at all rose from 3% in 1990 to 17% in 2024, a five-fold increase in one generation. Close friendships among men specifically have fallen by roughly half since 1990. The share of men with zero close friends has roughly quintupled in the same period. Time spent with friends dropped 37% between 2014 and 2023 alone, a collapse that happened almost entirely within the smartphone era. Young people aged 15 to 29 spent 45% more time completely alone in 2023 than the same age group did in 2010. 79% of Gen Z report feelings of isolation. 71% of millennials, 50% of baby boomers. The pattern moves in exactly one direction. Every generation younger than the last is lonelier, more isolated, and has fewer close bonds than the generation before it, despite living inside the most technologically connected society that has ever existed. Connection and loyalty are not the same thing, and the last 2 decades have proven that conclusively. You can be in constant digital contact with hundreds of people and have functionally no one who would actually show up for you. Only 26% of Gen Z adults aged 23 to 29 are married. Compare that to 42% of millennials at the identical age. Match Group, the company that owns Tinder, Hinge, and most of the dating apps operating in the West, reported over $3.1 billion in revenue in 2024, money that comes entirely from people who remain single and keep paying. The business has no financial interest in your romantic success. Every match that actually works is a subscriber lost. The incentive built into the platform runs directly against the outcome it claims to offer. Machiavelli, writing in The Prince, made an argument that reads uncomfortably like a description of the modern dating economy 500 years early. He argued that a ruler cannot safely depend on being loved, because love is a bond the other party can break whenever it becomes inconvenient to their own interest. And men, he wrote, are so false, so avaricious, that if you rely entirely on their goodwill, you will be abandoned the moment your usefulness to them runs out. He believed fear was the more reliable bond precisely because it did not depend on the other person's continued goodwill. The dating app economy has built Machiavelli's cynical model directly into its architecture. The relationship exists only as long as it remains the most convenient option available, and an app specifically engineered to always present a theoretically better option is a machine built to prevent the one thing that used to make romantic loyalty durable, the sense that you had actually stopped looking. Cicero took the opposite position, and I think it is worth including because it gives you the actual standard loyalty is supposed to meet, even if almost nothing in modern life clears the bar anymore. In his essay on friendship de amicitia, he argued that genuine loyalty can only exist between people of comparable virtue, freely given, not extracted, through dependency or convenience. A bond maintained only because one party currently needs something from the other, he wrote, is not friendship at all. It is a transaction wearing the mask of one. That is precisely the diagnosis for almost every institutional relationship discussed in this video so far. The mask of loyalty, the substance of transaction. Now the final layer, and the one that gets talked about the least honestly, which is the loyalty a state owes to the specific population that built it. A country is not an abstraction, it is a historically continuous people with a specific inheritance, a specific culture, a specific set of institutions built by specific generations who expected that inheritance to be protected and handed forward. That is the actual foundation underneath the more abstract idea of citizenship. A government owes its founding population something beyond neutral administration. It owes continuity, priority, the basic assurance that their children will inherit a country recognisably continuous with the one their grandparents built. Across Britain, across the United States, across Canada, that basic assurance has been quietly withdrawn, not through any single dramatic policy, but through 3 decades of decisions made by governments who treated the character of the country as endlessly negotiable, and who treated any objection from the people actually living inside the change as evidence of moral failure rather than a legitimate grievance from a population watching its own inheritance renegotiated without its consent. This is not a claim that any individual newcomer to Britain or America or Canada has done something wrong. It is a claim about the state and the specific loyalty it owes the population it was originally built to serve. When jobs are outsourced abroad or handed to imported labour at lower cost, when housing waiting lists are structured in ways that visibly deprioritise the people whose taxes built the housing stock in the first place, when raising any concern about the pace or scale of demographic change gets you formally labelled as bigoted by the same institutions asking for your continued loyalty, the state has done to its own founding population precisely what Venice did to Byzantium. It has extracted value from the party it was supposed to protect, while continuing to demand the loyalty of that party as though nothing had changed. You cannot ask a population to remain loyal to a state that no longer treats their specific inheritance as worth protecting. That is not hatred of anyone. It is the same transactional logic running through every other section of this video, applied at the level of the nation itself. Loyalty was never sentimental, it has always rested on the reasonable expectation that the other party is protecting something you both have a stake in. Remove that expectation, and the loyalty built on it has no foundation left to stand on. Now bring all 5 of these back together, because they are not 5 separate stories. They are the same story told at 5 different scales. Byzantium trusted Venice because an alliance is supposed to mean something more than temporary convenience. Venice extracted everything it could the moment convenience and loyalty stopped pointing in the same direction, and 800 years of walls came down in 3 days. The modern employee trusts the employer because loyalty is supposed to be reciprocal. The employer extracts maximum value and cuts the relationship the instant a spreadsheet says it is more efficient to do so. The modern citizen trusts dating apps to help them find a partner. The apps extract subscription revenue precisely by preventing that outcome for as long as possible. The modern citizen trusts the state to protect the specific inheritance and continuity of the nation they were born into. The state has, across 3 decades, treated that inheritance as an infinitely renegotiable asset rather than a trust to be protected. Every single one of these is the same mechanism. A party that is owed loyalty extracts value from the party offering it, while continuing to demand the loyalty as though the extraction were not happening. Aristotle told you which kind of bond survives this. Only friendship of virtue, bonds that exist independent of what either party currently gets from the other. Everything else, in his framework, was always going to dissolve the moment convenience stopped aligning with commitment. What has happened across the modern West is not a mysterious collapse of some abstract social fabric. It is Aristotle's 2nd and 3rd categories of friendship being revealed all at once at every level of society, as having been utility-based all along, dressed up in language that implied something sturdier. The specific danger, and this is where the Byzantine example matters most, is that broken loyalty does not simply cost you once. Constantinople never recovered its former strength after 1204, even though it survived as a city for another 250 years. The wound from an ally is different from a wound from an enemy, because an enemy's betrayal confirms what you already expected. An ally's betrayal removes your ability to trust the next ally too. And a civilization that has lost the capacity to trust its own alliances, its own institutions, its own government's basic good faith, is a civilization that has lost something considerably harder to rebuild than any single lost battle. That is where the modern West currently stands, not one broken bond, All of them simultaneously at every scale, from the individual relationship to the institutional to the national. The employer who will cut you the moment the model says to. The app that profits from your continued loneliness. The friendships that never form because nobody has the time, the proximity, or the trust required to build them anymore. The state that has spent 3 decades treating its own founding population's inheritance as something to be endlessly managed away rather than protected. The 4 bronze horses stolen from Constantinople in 1204 are still standing over the door of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice today, 800 years later. Nobody sent them back. That is what a broken loyalty actually looks like once the dust settles. Not restored, not apologized for, just quietly normalized, decorating the entrance of the party that took it, while the party it was taken from spends the rest of its history slowly declining, never quite recovering the thing it lost the moment it discovered its ally could not be trusted. The question worth sitting with is not whether loyalty still matters. It obviously does, or none of this data would be worth collecting in the first place. The question is whether the institutions currently asking for it, your employer, your government, the state that governs the country you were born into, have done anything in the last 3 decades to actually earn it back. The data says no. And the walls, once they fall to an ally, do not tend to get rebuilt by the people who broke them. There is a specific historical figure worth bringing in here who lived through exactly this kind of collapse and wrote about it with unusual clarity, because he was watching it happen from inside a system that had already broken. Niccolo Machiavelli did not write The Prince as an abstract philosophical exercise. He wrote it as a Florentine diplomat who had watched his own government, and the governments of every state around it, betray alliance after alliance, always for the same reason whenever short-term advantage outweighed the cost of the betrayal. He was not recommending disloyalty. He was describing with cold precision what he had personally observed as the actual operating logic of every state and every prince he had studied, regardless of what language of honour and alliance they used in public. His conclusion was bleak but consistent with everything the modern data now shows. Men, he wrote, will honour their obligations exactly as long as it costs them nothing significant to do so, and abandon them the moment it does. He was not saying this was good. He was saying that any system relying on the assumption it would not happen was a system built on a false premise. The princes who survived, in his account, were the ones who understood this and built their structures accordingly, rather than the ones who continued operating as though loyalty alone would hold anything together. Read the Edelman Trust Barometer data again with Machiavelli's framework in mind. Employers who once offered pensions, career ladders, and job security in exchange for loyalty removed those things once it became cheaper to do so, and the loyalty evaporated within a single generation, exactly as Machiavelli's model predicts it should. Governments who once offered their populations continuity and priority in exchange for civic participation withdrew those things once other priorities emerged, and the willingness to serve those governments collapsed in lockstep, exactly as his model predicts. He was not being cynical for his own sake. He was describing the actual mechanism 500 years before anyone had the data to prove him right at scale. Now, something worth adding about Canada specifically, because it deserves its own mention rather than being folded silently into a generic Western average. Canada has experienced one of the most aggressive immigration expansions of any developed nation over the past decade, with population growth driven overwhelmingly by immigration rather than natural increase, at a pace that outstripped the construction of housing, healthcare capacity, and infrastructure required to absorb it. The specific promise made to ordinary Canadians that this expansion would be managed in a way that preserved their standard of living has been visibly and repeatedly broken, with housing costs in cities like Toronto and Vancouver reaching levels that have made home ownership for a Canadian in their 20s or 30s born and raised there a near impossibility in many major population centres. This is the same mechanism described earlier applied to a specific country. A government that owed its founding population continuity and priority instead treated both as negotiable. At a pace and scale the population itself was never meaningfully consulted on, and is now expressing surprise at the resulting collapse in trust and civic loyalty that every poll in the country now documents. The same pattern holds for the United States and Britain, with local variations in scale and timing, but the underlying mechanism is identical across all three. A state extracts the good faith of its founding population by treating their specific inheritance as an infinitely flexible policy variable, while continuing to expect the same unconditional loyalty that population once gave, when the arrangement was still, in practice, reciprocal. Now let me bring in one more piece of the historical record, because Byzantium's story does not end with the sack in 1204, and the second half of it is just as instructive as the betrayal itself. The Byzantines did eventually retake Constantinople in 1261, under Michael VIII Palaiologos, but the empire that emerged from that recapture was a shadow of what had existed before 1204. It had lost its wealthiest provinces. It had lost the trade networks Venice had seized for itself. Most importantly, it had lost something much harder to rebuild than territory or trade: the assumption that its alliances meant anything durable. For the remaining 2 centuries of its existence, Byzantine diplomacy became a desperate, exhausting exercise in trying to secure Western military help against the rising Ottoman threat. Offers that were made, half-honoured, withdrawn, renegotiated, and ultimately never delivered at the scale required, because the West had learned correctly that Byzantium had few reliable levers left to enforce any bargain it struck. Constantinople finally fell in 1453, not because the Ottomans were unstoppable in some abstract sense, but because 2.5 centuries of accumulated broken alliances had left the city with functionally no one willing to show up when it actually mattered. That is the long-term cost of broken loyalty that the modern West has not yet fully priced in. It is not just that trust in your employer, your government, your dating app, and your friendships has collapsed simultaneously. It is that once a pattern of broken good faith becomes the default expectation, every future request for loyalty, even a genuine one, gets read through the lens of all the previous ones that turned out to be extraction dressed up as commitment. A government that has spent 3 decades treating its own population's trust as an infinitely renewable resource may eventually need that trust for something that actually matters: a genuine crisis, a genuine threat, a moment requiring real collective sacrifice, and discover, the way Byzantium discovered in its final desperate century, that the resource it assumed would always be there when needed has been quietly, irreversibly spent. Cicero's standard is worth returning to here, because it is the only standard in this entire video that describes what loyalty would need to look like for any of this to actually be repaired. He insisted that real loyalty could not be manufactured through need or dependency. It had to be freely given between parties of comparable standing, sustained by mutual respect, rather than by one party's leverage over the other. Nothing described in this video, not the employer-employee relationship, not the dating app economy, not the modern relationship between Western governments and the populations that built them, currently meets that standard. All of it runs on leverage. All of it runs on one party needing something the other party controls. The specific tragedy is that this was not always true. The employer-employee compact of the mid-20th century, whatever its flaws, was built on a genuine, if imperfect, mutual obligation. The post-war civic contract between Western governments and their populations, whatever its blind spots, was built on an assumption of continuity that both sides largely honoured for decades. Marriage rates, friendship networks, community institutions, all of it rested on a baseline expectation of durability that has been dismantled deliberately and gradually, not by any single villain, but by 3 decades of institutions on every level, choosing short-term extraction over long-term trust, exactly as Machiavelli predicted they eventually would once the cost of doing so dropped low enough. The walls of Constantinople stood for 800 years because they were built to withstand exactly the kind of assault an enemy would mount. Nobody built them to withstand betrayal from the inside, because nobody seriously imagined an ally would be the one to bring them down. That is the specific, uncomfortable lesson sitting underneath everything in this video. The bonds that fail catastrophically are rarely the ones you spent your effort defending against an obvious enemy. They are the ones you assumed, because of the language of loyalty attached to them, could never actually break. Every relationship described in this video, the state, the employer, the friend, the lover, the nation's covenant with its own founding people, was built on exactly that assumption, and every one of them has now shown in the space of a single generation that the assumption no longer holds. So, where does this actually leave you? Because I do not think the point of any of this is despair. and I do not think it should be read as an argument that loyalty is dead in some permanent unrecoverable sense either. The specific insight Aristotle offers, that only friendship of virtue survives when convenience stops aligning with commitment, is not just a diagnosis. It is also the only genuine solution available. The bonds worth rebuilding are not the utility-based ones that dominate modern institutional life, because those were never going to hold regardless of how much sentimental language got attached to them. The bonds worth rebuilding are the ones chosen freely, sustained by actual mutual respect rather than by either party's leverage over the other, exactly as Cicero described nearly 2,000 years before any of the data in this video existed. That looks different at every scale this video has covered. It means recognizing that an employer relationship, however friendly the branding, is fundamentally a utility exchange, and building your actual security around skills, savings and options rather than around a loyalty the other side has already demonstrated it will not reciprocate the moment the numbers change. It means recognizing that a dating app, however it markets itself, profits from your continued search rather than your success, and treating the friendships and relationships that actually last as the ones built away from an algorithm with a direct financial interest in your dissatisfaction. It means investing deliberately in the kind of friendship that survives a house move, a job change, a bad year, because the data is unambiguous that this specific kind of bond is the one an entire generation has stopped building, and it is also the one most within your own direct control to rebuild, starting immediately, without waiting for any institution above you to change first. And at the level of the nation, it means being honest, without flinching, about what a state actually owes the population that built it, and refusing to accept that naming the gap between that obligation and the current reality makes you disloyal to anyone. Byzantium's mistake was never that it trusted an ally. Alliances require trust to function at all. Byzantium's mistake was continuing to extend that trust without ever forcing an honest reckoning of whether it was still being honoured, until the moment the walls actually came down, and there was no time left to ask the question. The 4 bronze horses are still standing over St. Mark's Basilica. They have been there for 800 years. Nobody is coming to take them back, and nobody in Venice has ever felt obligated to return them. That is what happens once a broken loyalty gets normalized for long enough. It stops being remembered as a betrayal and starts simply being read as how things are. The question this video is leaving you with is the same one at every level it has covered. Not whether the institutions above you, your employer, your government, the platforms mediating your relationships deserve blind loyalty. They have already answered that question through 3 decades of consistent, documented behaviour. The real question is whether you can see the pattern clearly enough, across every scale it operates at simultaneously, to stop extending unconditional trust to institutions that have shown you, repeatedly, exactly how conditional their own commitment to you actually is. Byzantium did not see it coming from an ally. You do not have that excuse. The data has already told you everything you need to know about which bonds in your life are built on genuine mutual commitment, and which ones are quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment it becomes more convenient to extract from you than to protect you.